Good morning, and thanks very much for coming this morning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about communications, and that's where I'm here working with Merit, talking about communications and a consultative approach that will help achieve the project goals. So for this morning, I'm going to talk a little bit about what communications is, a simple communications model, some things that contribute to effective communications, why we communicate, some things that get in the way of effective communications, and then a little bit about organizational communications at the very end. So it's a very fast overview. It's a very big topic. So please stop me and ask anything as we go along. I hope it's not too simple either. So first of all, what is communication? It's the process of just sharing information between two or more people to have the outcome that you're looking for. And the word communication comes from a Latin word, communicare, which means to impart or to participate. And its root word is common. So we're seeking a common kind of understanding. And it's said that we never don't communicate. We're always communicating, even if we don't know we are. We look at a person and that's telling us something. The baby, as an example, is communicating very strongly. Crying. Why do we communicate? So it's suggested we communicate for three main reasons, and you might think of others, but they kind of fit under those main headers. So one is to make or maintain a relationship, and that's key, and I think we're going to hear that again and again as we go through this Merit project, because we have to have a relationship on which to build trust and truthfulness and openness before we can communicate anything effectively. So to make or maintain relationships seems kind of off to the side, but it's key. It underlines everything. To share or receive information, and then to persuade somebody to act, to change a behavior, to change an attitude or belief. So those are the three real reasons why we tend to communicate. Those are our purposes. So the sort of the study of communications actually started only in about 1950. Even though we've been doing it as a species since we originated, it's only really been studied in depth since about the 50s, and there have been many attempts at making a model, like what is the model for communications. So a really simple one says there's a sender, and the sender wants to deliver some kind of message, and there's a channel, we call it a channel, through which we deliver that message, and that can be face-to-face, like we're doing now. It could be a memo, it could be a presentation at a conference, it could be through mass media, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And you're sending that message to a receiver, we call it, or one or more persons. There's a feedback loop, and that was a secondary addition to that first model, because it implies that if I send a message and I don't ask you if you understand my language or if you can hear me, then no communication has taken place. So that feedback loop is really, really, really important to communications. And then at the bottom I've written and noise. So noise is a term that refers to things that get in the way of people either sending the information or hearing the information. So there's lots of different kinds of noise. So first of all, could be just physical noise. Could be noisy out there, and it's disrupting your attention span. It could be too cold or too hot in the room, so you're not even paying attention, you're just uncomfortable. And then if you think, for instance, when I was Skyping with Cindy before I came, it could just be in the transition. I miss her on the cell phone, you miss parts of a transmission. So noise can be physical noise that gets in the way of sending or receiving that information. There could be psychological noise. So that refers to if you're distracted, so you're worried about something, your child is unwell, or you're nervous about your job security, or it could be biases. When you look at who's speaking or delivering the message, you could have a bias, either favorable or unfavorable, about that person or even about that topic. And so you're not really listening because you've already decided, I don't like that person, I don't like that topic, I don't agree with that view. So those things can get in the way of good communication as well. And then the last thing is semantic noise. And so we all kind of have a sense of understanding of different words, but maybe our sense of understanding of that word is a little different to how another person understands it. And I'll give you an example. I was working with the president of our technical institution who was new to the institution, and I was going around with him to talk to all of our senior leadership team. And he was talking about, we'd had lots of change the year before, and this year he wanted to consolidate, and he used that word. And all of a sudden the mood in the room got very uncomfortable, and a lot of people had taken the word consolidate to mean we were going to merge departments and people were going to lose jobs. What he did mean was, we're not going to do anything new. We're just going to make sure we've done all the things we said we were going to do. So just as simple as one word changed everybody's understanding. Everybody stopped listening because they were scared, and we had to figure out what we'd done wrong and where was the complication. So we all give different meanings to words. Technical terms and jargon, they say be very, very careful with. So, we don't all understand technical terms. We haven't all come through the same kinds of training. And jargon is similar, sort of a slang word, a word that's used in your particular clique. The other one is acronyms. A lot of people find acronyms frustrating, and you've done a good job of detailing those as appendices or right up at front behind your table of contents, because what is MR-PAM? Somebody calls it Mr. PAM, or the long word law. What is it called?
Long name law.
Long name law. Yeah, so you try to help people understand by helping them in advance before they find confusion. So really, communication is one thing, but really we want it to work. We want it to be effective. So to be effective, the information that you're trying to share, your idea, your plan, your vision, your goals, must be sent and received without that meaning being distorted or changed by noise. And having that feedback loop is key. But it actually starts even kind of before getting feedback. It starts with knowing who you're going to be talking to. So the better we understand our audience, and that comes from hearing, but sometimes we're reading or seeing, but anyway, we're going to call it an audience. The better we understand what that audience's current knowledge and perceptions and values and beliefs before we communicate, the better the chances are that we can communicate effectively. So it's important to try and understand to the degree you can. And so that's why asking for input or consulting or collaborating with a member of the audience before to inform your communication efforts enhances effectiveness. So this is why we're talking about consultation throughout this project, and this is why we're talking about communication throughout this project. What do the people that we want to talk to and work with and influence and help, what are they thinking now? What are they feeling now? What are they believing now? So that where we start our communications is at the right place. And then how can we work with them to make sure we're going at the right pace, we've got the right information, we're dealing with confusion as it unrolls and so on. It's very, very key. And so I'll give an example that I was just saying talking to Oyuna about. And we had been talking about, would there be a chance to go and visit an IMAG? where mining had occurred. So I could feel better about my interpretations of what those views and feelings and attitudes are. And so Una sent me some 4 links to information and videos and so on a mine that has been abandoned, that's close into UB, but that's providing, dangerous, but it's providing a living for about 70 miners and their families. And so there's another view, so some people might say abandoned mines are, a blot on the landscape and they need to be remediated and we don't want mining in our community, but this group would be saying we need to keep this mine open because it's providing an essential living for us. So there's another view. So that's why you have to know who it is that you're talking to and what all those different views are so that you can start in the right place and work together to kind of find a solution that's going to work for everybody, for the country, for the community, for their families, for the people that are making a livelihood from it. So you have to know your audience, but then you also have to select an appropriate channel that we talked about. So how are you going to send and receive this information? So it could be one-to-one. I sit down in an office and talk, or talk on the phone, or email back and forth. One to a small group, or one to many, in a presentation. Interpersonally, so between people, or via mass and social media is another way to communicate. It can be passive, so I'm just sending the information and hoping it got there, or it can be very interactive. Please tell me what you think. Please give me feedback. Please, ask questions. It can be face-to-face, could be written, and it could be using audio-visual. The next notion is interesting because we can control the information. Like I can say, I'm going to say these things, so I have control over what I'm going to say. But if I send a news release out to the local media, or if we do something that's interesting or bad, the local media can pick it up and they can decide what they're going to say. So that's uncontrolled. And that can be problematic for your organization and the goals that they're attempting to put across. Mm-hmm. But it could be problematic for an individual as well. I could say something to you, and then you might pass it on, and the way that you've interpreted what I've said might be slightly different than I meant it, and all of a sudden it's not controlled anymore. It's out there, but it's a little bit different than I had intended because it wasn't documented or recorded. Social media is another example of absolutely uncontrolled distribution. So you post something on social media and the world can know about it very, very quickly with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and so on. So it's important to think about the degree to which you really want to be really clear on the specifics of your communication, and then choose a medium that is going to give you that degree of control, right? So each has advantages or disadvantages, so it's back to, what's your purpose, but also what's your audience? So at the IMAG and Zoom level, are people reading the daily newspaper? Are they looking at posters? Are they going to going to meetings? So what are they wanting in the way of a channel? And how do you get to them using a channel that they like to use, that they're familiar with, that they trust? So you have a choice to make based on what's best for your message, but also the audience is going to tell you, we need this kind of communication because it fits with our lifestyle, our commitments, and so on. In addition to knowing your audience, knowing your channel, and thinking about your message, there's some other considerations that include, what is the message that you're trying to put out there? What's the reason for it? what's its content? So sometimes messages are quite complicated, and you don't just want to say them, you want to actually have quite a detailed write-up or handbook or publication. When we do our annual report for GAC and the Project Steering Committee, we definitely want it documented, what we tried to do, what we achieved. We want it probably fairly formal in tone. And so we want to think about what are we trying to communicate and to whom, and what is the right purpose, content, format, tone to be able to deliver it. Another thing is timing. So mostly we want to be open, sincere, honest, freely giving of information. But sometimes timing is important. And so as for instance, let's say that something, so thinking back on my career, let's say that something negative was going to happen or had happened to our organization. In terms of timing, we want to tell every single person who works for the organization first, before we tell the media, before we tell our partners, before we tell anybody else, because it affects them directly. So they need to be able to hear it from the appropriate person, and they need to hear it before they just hear it rumored or read it in the media, because that's not fair to them. So your partner would hear it before they hear it in the media. So the timing of your messaging, even though it seems like we want to be open and honest and tell everybody, we also have to be aware of people's fears and concerns and understand kind of who that message is going to affect most directly, and then think about our timing in that way. Location is also important. So if I'm going to have a serious conversation with a person, maybe about work performance, it might be quite scary for, if I was a supervisor, to have you come to my office and talk about work performance, because I have power in that situation, and that's frightening already. So to make it a more level playing field and to make the message received more comfortably, it's important to go to the location of the person who I want to talk about performance with, because there's a power imbalance there. So that's important too. So thinking about location, where do you go? To talk to SUMS and IMAGs, we don't say, oh, please come to the city, we're going to talk to you all about, communicating. We want to go to them and say, what are your issues and concerns, and how can we work together? How can we communicate better? How can we talk about other means of livelihood and so on? The appropriate spokesperson is important too. So if it's something that is a very consequential, strategic initiative, you would want to choose a spokesperson who is at that sort of decision-making level of authority in an organization, so that because they're the decision makers, because they're the strategizers, you want them to be telling you rather than having it interpreted through a few levels. So choosing your spokesperson carefully is important. Some people maybe even are better communicators than others, so your senior person might not be an effective communicator. So you might choose somebody that's still at a senior level that has a better ability to connect with the audience, to interpret, to read what that feedback is that's coming to you. We talked about feedback earlier, but there can be feedback just in the terms of facial expression, or somebody's fallen asleep, or right. You need to be watching what you're getting back. Another consideration is the possible effect of two kind of terms that we talk about in communications, and one is an influencer. And I think we're all kind of influencers in different aspects of our lives, in that people maybe think we know a lot about a particular topic. We're well informed, we're good thinkers on that topic, and so on. So as we think about this project, the Merit Project, and how we're going to do a good job of getting to IMAG and SUM level, getting to ministry staff and so on, it is useful to identify who are those people that are the, sort of the influencers in those organizations. Who do people go to say, what do you think about that? What do you think? Is that a good idea? Should I go? So if you can identify those influencers, they can be a first level of communication that help you get to that other tier of people who are nervous, who are undecided, who have negative views, who are not ready to hear yet. So influencers can be very, very, very effective in helping you get your message across. It's also thought that you, one, might have something in it. So I'm influencing you, I'm trying to tell you something because I'm going to get something back. They might think that. But if they can go to their trusted friend, their influencer, then their influencer is more credible to them. It's not coming from this other party that they don't know, that they haven't got a relationship with, that they haven't built trust with. They're able to go to somebody they do trust to say, what do you think? Should I trust? Is it a good idea? And that influencer that can then also give you back ideas that will help you change your messaging, change your approach, change your content, tone, format, whatever. So kind of on the other side, there's something that they call a gatekeeper. So sometimes there's an important person or group that you'd like to get to, but there's some body, an individual or a body that is in your way. They're kind of a gatekeeper. They're closing the gate and saying you can't come in, you can't talk. So in organizational terms, we sometimes think of the person's scheduler or executive assistant or secretary. We sometimes think they could be a gatekeeper. We can't even get an interview. We can't get a meeting. We can't, our emails are not even going through. So sometimes, so it's astute, if you're able to do that, to identify where you're encountering a gatekeeper and making sure that you have a relationship not with the minister himself, but who's the gatekeeper. So if you've got a relationship with the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper, you can build a trusting relationship and an open relationship, you're more likely to get to the person that you want to get to start your relationship, to achieve your communications objectives, and so on. We were talking a little bit about gatekeepers last night in a conversation. So influencers and gatekeepers, one is a big help, and so it's astute to try and figure out who those are, but gatekeepers can be a real challenge, and it's astute to try and figure out who those are as well, to enable you, once again, to build that relationship with the person and achieve the communications objectives that you are trying to achieve. So it's all about coming back again to relationship building. And then the last thing is, it's really important to try and incorporate a feedback loop. So it's easy to get a feedback loop here. You seem to be interested. You're nodding your heads occasionally. You're not asleep. It's all good. But when you're doing a written communication, when you're doing something through mass media, when you're doing something through social media, it's important to at least think about: is there a way I can incorporate a feedback loop to know whether the message is even being received? Is it being understood? Am I influencing attitudes and beliefs? And is somebody being inspired to act as a result of this communication effort? So whatever your communication objective and the channel you've chosen and the audience that you've done your research on, key to try and figure out how to build that feedback loop in. because if it hasn't been received, understood, shifted attitudes, it's not achieved your communication objective. So feedback loop is key. Communication is also about more than talking or writing or delivering your message. It's suggested that adults spend 70% of their time communicating, but of this, an average of 45% is spent listening compared to 30% speaking, 16% reading, and 9% writing. And then, so that listening is a key part of the communication effort. So we've talked about just, who is our audience and where are they at with respect to values, beliefs, attitudes, and so on. What channels do they prefer? Where should we have this communication take place? What's the timing? But it's also important when we're talking about consultative approaches and effective communication that we understand the listening aspect of it. And I really like the Mark Twain quote that if we were supposed to talk more than we listen, we'd have 2 tongues and 1 ear. Listening is key to effective communications and involves listening not only to what's said, but to what's left unsaid or only partially said. So you're meeting with someone and you're talking about something sensitive, and they might say something bad, but maybe by their body language or the way the sentence trails off or the fact that they've only dealt with half of what you've actually said, they've only reacted to half, you're getting clues as to where they're at with respect to accepting, understanding, or acting on what you're talking about. It's key also to observe body language and especially to note inconsistency between verbal and nonverbal. So I might be going, yes, but I'm nervous. I'm not fully there. So to watch what I look like, what my face looks like, where my eyes are going, any hesitation is giving you a good clue to whether I'm actually behind the words that I'm saying. There might be a disconnect. Empathizing, and I think that's key. We when we're listening, we should also be trying to sort of put ourselves in that other person's shoes. So we're not listening only for what they're saying, but we're trying to understand how they might feel about what we're saying, and trying to understand how that's affecting what they're saying back to us. And so that empathy is key. Listening for ideas, not just words. So we're not all as effective as we would love to be. It takes, a lifetime to be able to put our ideas into pictures or words and to present it. And so try to listen to more than just the words. Listen for the enthusiasm, listen for the fear, listen for the, you try to see the picture that they're presenting. And then lastly, it's interesting that we listen at about 450 words a minute, so we can listen to a lot, and we can listen to more words than people can speak. So we've got this kind of idle time. So it's suggested that we should be using our idle time to be really listening, as opposed to thinking, that smells good there, it's nearly lunchtime, I wonder if my little guy is, getting hungry now, did I forget to pack his favorite toy, whatever. So using that idle time to truly, take advantage of all these other clues about how we can be effective listeners. The other thing that a lot of us do is we tend to think about what we're going to say. We're going to prepare our response. While that person is talking, we're thinking about what we're going to say. Instead of carrying on listening, wait till the very end, capture everything. What are the ideas? How are you empathizing? What are they not saying? Is there a disconnect? So effective listening is something we could spend a lifetime, becoming better at too. Effective communication requires planning and preparation. It requires skills and abilities for sure. It requires a desire to communicate. We've got to want to be sharing and understanding and building relationship and all of those things. We've got to want to do it in order to be effective. Sincerity and openness, truthfulness, openness, trust. And it's interesting sometimes, so one of the human trait is many of us are shyer than others and uncomfortable sharing an idea, particularly where we may be in a situation where there's different sort of status. I don't know if you talk about sort of hierarchy and status in Mongolia, but somebody might be perceived to be a higher status. You might be a bit shy to speak out. But the degree to which we can be effective at communicating requires that we be brave and try our hardest to say what it is that we're feeling, because it's only then that we know that communication is actually taking place, and we can adjust the way we're talking, the way we're building relationship, the way we're communicating, where we're starting. We can adjust that, and we can all get better, so we can learn from that. So it's hard, but it's important to try to share what it is that you're feeling, because it will help ultimately achieve that shared understanding. Requires building trust, and so that's why it keeps coming back to relationship, because the minute I meet you, I don't necessarily trust you. I might want to trust you, but I need time to know who you are and whether you're honest and decent. So we need to build trust, and that takes time. Willingness to deal with elephants in the room. I don't know if you're familiar with that expression. Yes? No? So what they say is there might be this enormous elephant in the room, and we can all see it, but we don't want to talk about it because it's a bit uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So an elephant in the room could be, what could be a good example? In Alberta, when I was working in a technical institute, the government said every educational institution has to cut 21% from their budget. 21% over 3 years. So until the president was willing to talk about that with us and to start to develop process and so on, there was this huge elephant in the room. So he could be saying whatever he wanted to say, but nobody was listening because there was an elephant in the room. Jobs were going to be lost, and nobody was talking. So it's really important to not let those elephants sit in the room and to not acknowledge them, because they're there, and everybody's thinking about them, even if we're not talking about them. They're there. Frequent, open, honest communication efforts. So, we just get better at it. We be open, we be honest, we try to share our feelings and fears and concerns, hopes and dreams, and it gets better because you're building that trust, you're building that relationship. Appealing to multiple senses, so it's said that, particularly visuals improve our understanding because we're reading it or hearing it and seeing it. It's said that if you see a picture, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. That little baby crying, you get that right away. So it increases the speed that we, receive it. It triggers emotion, and we're more compelled to act if we're touched in the heart, as opposed to just hearing logical reasons why we should act. We're more compelled if our emotion is triggered, and it also helps us remember. So using multiple senses, so visuals and auditory, as Gus has told us, if we've got a recording of this, so much more lively than just reading something passive, blank, non-interactive on a screen or on a PC. And then it also requires inviting and responding to input and feedback, so that whole collaboration thing. So about 3 more slides. How are we doing? Okay. So I said I was going to talk just a little bit about organizational communication. So it's usually a key responsibility area, usually at the senior management level. So in North American, European organizations, communication is usually a title, usually sits at the senior management level, because it's that senior management's reminder of the importance of being open, being honest, timing, of knowing your audience, of being an ear to the ground, of all of those things, and then enabling that piece of any organizational strategy to build into everything the organization is doing. Usually responsible for branding, marketing, social media, but internal and external communications are every bit as important and underlie it all as well. Also, community relations, public relations, media relations, investor and government relations. Did you notice that they all have the word relations and relationship in there? So it is key. You can't buy that. You have to earn it. You have to earn the trust. You have to spend the time. You have to build those relationships. And that's what we've got to do with the IMAGs and Zooms. That's what we've got to do with the ministry and the institutes and the authorities and associations. So we've got to build those relationships so that they trust us that we're doing the right thing. We're there to help. We have the expertise. And we want to work with them at an appropriate pace and in a way that works for them to achieve their goals. And usually develop strategies and action plans to learn about, understand and influence knowledge, attitudes, beliefs and practices of stakeholders and the wider public vis-a-vis the mission and goals of the organization. And I guess the last slide is really effective communications takes time. We become better at communicating throughout our lifetime. Building trust in a relationship takes time. Building skills and abilities surely takes time. Frequent, open, honest communication efforts take time. Consulting and inviting input takes time. Planning for inviting feedback takes time. Adapting to the input and feedback. So, you ask for input and feedback. You don't say, oh, good, thank you very much, and carry on your path. That's going to help you shape your process and adjust your messaging and change your timing and solicit another channel or whatever. So that you need to be building that in, and you need to be reacting to that. Repetition of message and adapted message takes time. So when it's said that to actually kind of learn and remember something takes up to 7 times, 7 repetitions. So repetition of message is going to take time too, up to 7 times, through different media, through different channels, over different time frames, but takes time. And the last thing is it's dynamic. So we can be building a great relationship and then, oops, something happens to disturb our trust. There's a misstep, and so oops. So you've actually lost some ground. So you have to go back and regain that and start back further than you were along. So it is a dynamic process because it's between one and at least one or more other people, and so it's changing constantly. So there are things that disrupt it, that hurt the trust relationship that you've built. Players change, so we're experiencing this here. So you've built the relationship, and oops, all of a sudden that person's not in that position anymore. So it's dynamic, it's changing constantly, so it's going to take time to be effective, but it's worth it because it underlies everything. It underlies the relationship that is necessary to achieve any of the goals that we're trying to achieve. And that's it. Yeah, so I hope it was helpful and that I didn't make it too basic and that you got some ideas from it. Thank you.